appreciate it if you would stop Rob Taylor from blathering on and on.
Opinions expressed by the talk show hosts, callers, or guests on the Rob Taylor Report do not necessarily represent the opinions of the hosting platform, subsidiaries, sponsors, or possibly anyone else on the planet or the known universe. From the tinfoil and lead-lined broadcast bunker on the beautiful south coast of Oregon, it's the Rob Taylor Report. So strap yourself in. Your political therapy session is about to begin. Ladies and gentlemen, here he is, the nearly famous Rob Taylor.
Hello, friends, patriots in Coos County, Oregon, and beyond. I know we get a lot of listeners from all over the place, and we are having a special show today. I've got a really great guest. My guest is Joel Skousen. He is a political scientist. He is a columnist. He is a strategist. By training, he is specializing or has specialized in the philosophy of law and constitutional theory, and is a designer of high security residences and retreats. We may talk about that if I give a few minutes to let him discuss that. And he has designed self-sufficient and high security homes throughout North America and has consulted in Central America as well. His latest book is in this field is Strategic Relocations, the North American Guide to Safe Places. And I'll tell you what, it is my honor to welcome Joel Skousen to my show. Hey, Joel, how you doing?
Thank you very much, Rob. I might note on your bio intro that my main avocation now is since 20 years or 21 years now as publisher and editor of the World Affairs Brief, where I cover every week's world events from the perspective of what the deep state and the media are not telling people. So it's based basically on my extensive history or understanding of the history behind the deep state.
I follow that quite often. I go there on a regular basis when I do reporting on different news issues, and especially anything that has to do with international politics and national politics, because, you know, my show a lot of times is dedicated to the local area, the state of Oregon and stuff. But when I definitely cover other issues outside of the state, yours is one of the first places I look. And you're correct. It's the World Affairs Brief, World Affairs Brief, and it's a great website. I've got it up on the screen right now. And I thought your article was great on the State of the Union address. The worst, yeah, I couldn't agree with you. You didn't like getting yelled at by Joe Biden, did you?
Well, of course, he had to be hyped up on uppers, these pills that, take you out of the depressed, the sleepy-eyed, half-closed-eyed, barely audible Biden came out as a gusto, yelling, screaming individual. He was hyped up so high, I think he was probably down and asleep for the next 2 days, trying to recover from that kind of mood-altering drug, which is very dangerous over the long term.
And I was wondering, is it amphetamines? Is it cocaine? Who knows? I mean, you look at, maybe it's a combo of several different drugs and B12 thrown in as well. So I do wonder, because at a man his age, pumping amphetamines or a type of speed into him, and that's literally what he looked like to me. Yeah, I just thought that was just highly dangerous.
Well, it is, and it looks like they're feeding him that same type of recipe for his news conferences ever since, and eventually this is going to lead to a mental collapse, because a mind that's in dementia really can't handle that for very long without some severe side effects. So they're really running a high risk doing this to try to get him reelected. But unfortunately, it shows that the Democrats, or not the Democrat, but the deep state who's running Biden, is probably going to try to run him again. There's all kinds of rumors that why don't they replace him with Gavin Newsom or Michelle Obama? She said, I'm not going to run. And for whatever you can do, it's the second time she's denied that. But in any case, it might be the deep state simply thumbing their nose at the public and saying to us, in essence, we could run a corpse just to show you how much power we have over the ability to steal an election. And they certainly do.
And now that's an excellent point, because like you said, they could literally run a dead man, and that dead man could, if they could prove that they could get him into office, it shows what they believe their omnipotent power to control and have authority over our country. And it's a scary proposition that the deep state has. And I'm glad you distinguish between the deep state and the Democrats, because I know they're hard to find, but there still are a couple of really good Democrats out there, that I know. I have relatives who are, they're true believers and the JFK Democrat type of members of the party, but yet their party and our Republican Party has been infiltrated by a deep state that is completely different than the general membership of the people who are the rank and file members.
Well, that's right. Now, of course, there's a much higher percentage of Democrats that are controlled. And, controlled by the deep state doesn't mean that you understand the entire agenda. For example, the WEF, the World Economic Forum, is very much controlled by the globalist conspiracy, but they still don't know about the upcoming World War III that's coming, that virtually is going to eliminate the World Economic Forum agenda. They're not going to be any AI robotic society after the grid goes down for a year and there's no internet, and Russia and China attack the U.S. And the West, as I have long warned about in my World Affairs Brief. And so just because they are controlled doesn't mean they know the entire agenda. Otherwise, they wouldn't be promoting these things about, well, in 2045, we're going to do this and that. I mean, there's not going to be a 2045 in the world that we know it. It's going to all change when this Third World War comes down. I'm predicting somewhere toward the end of this decade.
And that wouldn't be a shock to many of us who have been watching what's going on. And I told you the story about a politician that recently got me canceled off my radio show, and how we found out how he's being bribed by people in the Democrat Party who have made fortunes in China and Asia. And it's the people who have been compromised. They are in very high places all over the nation, but here in Oregon and on the West Coast, I think we have a higher level of our political officials who have either being bribed or they're being blackmailed, is what I believe is going on in Washington State, Oregon State, and California State with the laws that they've been passing. And the further we're going down this road to a communist country. And just your thoughts on that.
Well, there's a very large spectrum of how the deep state controls everyone. At the very top, it's my considered opinion that the deep state is, of course, I have to define for your listeners the deep state. It is the enforcement arm of the larger globalist conspiracy. So those that control the deep state, people like, James Comey and Robert Mueller and Christopher Wray, and we know that they're deep state, by the way, if you know your conspiratorial history, because each of those people were involved in a major cover-up of illegal actions by the government. Those three that I just mentioned were all involved in the cover-up of 9/11, which was a deep state operation from beginning to end, from the hiring of the terrorists to the loading of the buildings with explosives that brought them down, not the airplanes. But in any case, you have to. There are several elements that. One of those elements is immunity. They tend to pick people who have done illegal acts themselves, or at least have been immoral, have cheated on their wives, or better yet, for blackmail purposes, been involved in homosexuality or pedophilia. And that's what the Epstein whole operation was about, was getting film of these people in compromising situations. Not that they needed to use it very often because they're willing participants, but they are promised immunity. And you see that with the Clintons. No matter what they do, how bad they've been, they've got immunity. They're just never prosecuted for what they're doing. And the same thing with Joe Biden. I mean, he's got a list of skeletons in his closet so long from, well, I won't go through the entire list, but it's really bad. And he's got protection. Unless they do something, way off that, that you can't cover for them, and then they'll throw them under the bus. But that's one aspect, is immunity that they promise. The other is the promise of getting you wealthy. And that's why so many congressmen get these stock tips, insider training that's illegal for you and I to do. We'd get prosecuted, but they get insider trading tips all the time, and they're able to increase their net worth tremendously. Look at Barack Obama, never had a salary over $175,000 a year, and yet he's worth some $14 to $20 million. Now, how does that happen? How do you end up getting a $7 million property in Hawaii and a great big mansion in Chicago when you're a community organ? It's because you joined the deep state, and they promise you. He was a communist. He was raised and was a far left, but he was brought into the globalists, which is different than communism. And a lot of you conservatives don't understand this is not a communist takeover of the country. It's the globalist and deep state facilitating communists, which tends to break down the social order, create crises and conflict, that the globalists can come in with their more moderate false solutions, which always eventually ends up being globalism, join a global new world order. But they use communists to do that. And so that's very important to understand. Another one, of course, is threats and blackmail that keep them. But this is the promise of climbing the ladder. You can get people, dangle that out in front of them. You play your cards right, and you can go up and be ahead of the CIA and do this and that. And that's very enticing to people, and they don't even have to tell them the full agenda of what they have bought into. But they know that they're on board, and they generally do pick people that have a corrupt conscience so that they won't feel. They don't want to get whistleblowers that get cold feet halfway through the stream when they find out the horrible things that they end up doing. And that's one of the reasons why Donald Trump, for all his good intentions of wanting to make America great again, cannot drain the swamp, because he doesn't know conspiratorial history. If you don't know, for example, the story of the Vince Foster murder that they called a suicide, then you don't know that Brett Kavanaugh, who was number 2 in that investigation and covered up for it, is deep state. And that's why he's joined John Roberts whenever the deep state needs, not always, but just on crucial issues, to turn the corner and vote with the Democrats. They can get Brett Kavanaugh and John Roberts to do that. And occasionally a mainstream person like Amy Coney Barrett, who's not deep state in my opinion, but she's extremely mainstream and can be easily talked into certain things.
And one of the things that I would like you to distinguish, because we do have China and Russia, which are the communist states that we need to worry about. But then you have the globalist, and like you said, it's not a full-on communism. I don't know. What would you call it? Fabian socialism? How would you
exactly? No, the globalists have a very, very sophisticated form of socialism where you own it. We continue to tell you you're free. You have all your liberties, but we control it. In other words, it's like the EU. They gave you all the rights of family, individual property rights, free speech rights. All that's in the EU Constitution. Then there's this caveat in there, except when the society needs you to sacrifice your rights for the good of the whole. Now, that caveat destroys all rights when they want to. And that's the way that the globalists are much smarter than the communists. They don't come on with in-your-face tyrannies. It's secret, like the J6 people. I mean, they're under extreme tyranny and torture with sound blasting throughout the night, torture and various other things. So believe me, the Constitution is dead in this country if you're a dissident. They only pretend to work the Constitution and do it legally and abide by it to fool the American people that they think that we still have the rule of law in this country. But we do not. If you are deemed a dissident or an extremist, you can be surveilled, and that's what's going on in the country.
And that's one of the things that here in Oregon, just in our little area, because we're not a very large state. Well, we're a large state, but we don't have a large population. I think it's like 4 million, 3.5 to 4 million. And we just had recently, and it was about a month ago, but fairly recently, David Medina, who's a part of the Republican Party here. He just got arrested for being at the Capitol and going into the Capitol on January 6th. So they're still looking for these people. They're still arresting them. And the gentleman that we got elected to commissioner, his name happens to be Rod Taylor, no relation to me, but he was also at the January 6th investigation. And just 2 weeks ago, the former mayor of a city here, Coos Bay, went to the commissioners meeting and demanded that the sheriff arrest Rod Taylor and hold him for the U.S. Attorney General to pick up for the January 6th violation. So they're not stopping on any of this, and that second tiered justice is functioning just fine. And so I think a lot of us who are on this side of the aisle can really see how it's being played out here.
Yeah, absolutely. About the only safety we have is being public, so that if they take us or try to take us down, at least people will notice that we're missing and that something is wrong. But, January 6th was indeed a trap that was set up by the government with over 200 federal agents infiltrating the Trump movement and dressed up as MAGA supporters, dressed up as Antifa and other things. They had police enrage the crowd by throwing tear gas and flashbang grenades to anger them, which they did, to provoke these things. They opened the doors, they let them in. In fact, there was even one video of one of the police officers as people are streaming by after he opened the door. He said, "I disagree with this. I disagree with this," meaning that I was told to open the door and let everybody in. And of course, some of that is coming out, but the mainstream media will never cover this. But I'll tell you, there are two major mantras, two themes or memes that are being presented daily almost, and that is that the January 6th was an insurrection, was a violent insurrection and a threat to our democracy, as they say. And the other one is that the election of 2020 was never stolen, that was a lie. That's every time you hear Donald Trump continues to say, and it has been proven to be a lie, says the media. Well, it hasn't been proven to be a lie. I have the evidence, and I put it out in November of 2012 in the World Affairs Brief about the hack of the Edison Research data. Edison Research is the company. It's foreign owned by a company in Spain, but it collects all of the computer tabulation data from all the states and broadcasts it to the networks. And someone hacked into the data and found out how many hundreds of thousands of votes had been switched from Trump to Biden. I mean, he put out a whole spreadsheet. He said, here it is. This came in, this batch of 150,000 votes, and it was tallied to Biden and not to Trump. This batch of 105,000 votes didn't ever get to Trump. It wasn't going to Biden, but it was disappeared to Trump. And those were the kind of quantitative data that had Donald Trump's legal team got a hold of, they wouldn't have lost in court, because the courts basically threw out the cases saying, you have documented there are some irregularities, but you haven't shown that it would have made a difference in the election. So they needed the quantity data, and they didn't get it because Trump, because he can't see conspiracy, he can't see who's deep state and who isn't, picked Rudy Giuliani to be his top attorney. He was drunk most of the time, but he's deep state. He was part of the 9/11 cover-up. He was part of Building 7. He warned his staff to get out because he knew it was going to be imploded by controlled demolition. But he didn't warn the firefighters in the buildings 1 and 2, and they hate him to this day because they knew, at least a majority of the firefighters know, he betrayed them.
And that was very disappointing of Trump. Some of the deep staters that he hired, Bob Barr, I think, is a good example of that. Gosh, I can't think of the well, I think Haley. He even had Haley in his administration, didn't he? Yeah. So, and now the conflict between them when she just continued to run, and the only reason other than to keep attacking Trump is that she just made a lot of money on it as well, because, campaigning, there's a lot of money in campaigning. I known this for a long time watching other campaigns here just locally. It's amazing how much money can go through a campaign, and that money eventually finds its way into different businesses who are owned by the candidates or the people affiliated with the candidates. And, when you talk about these people who Trump surrounded himself with, you do have to question, why was he that gullible or was he that culpable? And I'll let you define that.
Well, I think, there has been this debate within the conservative movement for a long time about whether or not Trump is a controlled entity. But, I have analyzed Trump for many, many years and realized, no, it's not true. First of all, Donald Trump is someone, it's hard to believe anybody can control Donald Trump. He is an egotist. He's extremely proud. He just does his own thing. I mean, he hardly even can read a script without interjecting his own, usually problematic statements that he makes that gets him embarrassed. But you see, Donald Trump has a couple of major weaknesses. One, because of his immorality over time, he doesn't have the best conscience in the world. He once said in an interview when a person asked him about what he thinks about repentance, he says, I don't relate to repentance. Which is a real problem, especially when you try to claim that he's a Christian, or he made statements, in favor of being a Christian. But, to not repent or not feel repentant about kind of the sins that you've committed in terms of cheating on all of your wives, which he has, it affects your conscience. Now, for example, that combined with his sense of ego and flattery, he can really flatter people, talk about how great they are when they aren't that great, even said how great Hillary Clinton was at one time. But he's always subject to flattery too. When he met Xi Jinping at Mar-a-Lago, Xi Jinping came away thinking that Xi Jinping was his best friend, because Xi Jinping turned on the charm and convinced Donald Trump that they could be friends. And then Xi Jinping called Kim Jong-un in North Korea and told him, look, just turn on the charm and flatter this guy and he'll be putty in your hands. And that's exactly what happened. Instead of going to North Korea or talking to Kim Jong-un about getting him to give away his nuclear weapons, or else I'll use military force to do it, that's what Trump said. He got snookered by Kim Jong-un, came away thinking he was his best friend. And to this day, Donald Trump still thinks that Kim Jong-un is a very deep friend of his and that will abide by anything he asks him to do. Trump also thinks that he can stop the Ukraine war by simply asking Putin to stop it. And this is just extremely naive. I mean, I don't know any puppet that would make that kind of stupid statement, because it's simply unbelievable. And, Joe Biden wouldn't even make that statement as a complete puppet. But that's the ego at work. So it's very easy to talk Trump into things. Now, Trump had good gut feelings about things, like on birthright citizen. We should get away with this, or get away from this, letting people to drop a baby in this country and have it be an automatic citizenship, which was not law. It was never passed by Congress. It was merely an interpretation by the court on the 14th Amendment, which is erroneous on its face. But you see, immediately after stating that, his advisors attacked him on it and said, no, you can't say this because of this and this and this. And because he didn't know any arguments, he couldn't back it up and he couldn't pursue it, so he dropped it. And that's what happens on most every case. He talked about, redoing NAFTA, which became the USMCA, which turned out to be the TPP globalist trade agreement in sheep's clothing. And he bragged about it. He bragged about the vaccines. And to this day, he has never admitted his error in allowing the big pharma conspiracy to talk him into doing the rush job on the vaccine, which turned out to be so damaging and deadly to so many people.
Right. And he hasn't backed off that either.
No, he hasn't. He has now at least said, I won't ever mandate anything. That's as far as he's going to go. But, you've got to warn people they should never take another vaccine, because you simply can't trust governments. You can't trust the vaccine makers anymore, to produce a vaccine. So my concerted opinion is that Donald Trump is sincere in his general populist feeling about wanting to make America great, but he hasn't got a clue about how to do it, except the things that he did, which were right, which was open up oil production and gas production so that we become self-sustaining again, which is very possible, closing the border. And actually, he can't close the border, but he can return to Mexico, stay in Mexico while you're asylum, and that's a very good thing. But even then, there was still quite a bit of illegal invasion that the Border Patrol could not capture even during Trump. And guess who it was that stopped Trump being able to fund the border wall? It was the Republican leadership, Paul Ryan and others in the Congress. He had control over both houses of Congress, and Mitch McConnell would stifle it, or Paul Ryan would. And these are deep state people in the Republican Party which stop. So if Trump gets elected, and the Democrats are probably going to take back the House because there's so many, House people that are retiring and other things, but he wouldn't be able to do anything. But I'm convinced, absolutely convinced, that the deep state is going to steal this election, that Donald Trump will not win. And it'll make it very much easier because Robert F. Kennedy is in as an independent candidate, and he'll be able to take enough votes, or at least it will muddy the water so that it won't be clear that you have a fraud in an election. It would be clear if Biden's at a 32% polling and Trump is at 48, and suddenly it's reversed in the election. People are going to smell a rat, but you're not going to see that because they're going to be able to show Robert F. Kennedy in there taking votes from Trump, and it's going to be plausible. Now, that's the role that Ross Perot did, where the Democrats were able to get Bill Clinton elected because they financed Ross Perot. They allowed him, all the media coverage that they did so that he could pull votes from George H.W. Bush. Now, H.W. Bush was a deep stater himself.
Right.
But the Democrats wanted their own deep state leader, Bill Clinton, in rather than H.W. Bush, and that's why they outed him.
And talk about someone who is so compromised. I've never seen anyone as compromised as Bill Clinton. And, I like you said, it's, they've got so much on Biden. They had so much on him as well. And leading into this election, we have, we're going into the primary. I know Oregon's primary is in May 17th. We're late in the season. Most of them will be over with, and it'll probably be almost decided by that point in time. And as if there was a question, but you know what I mean? It's officially decided. So one of the things that a lot of people are concerned about is that Kennedy, as far as his third candidacy, a lot of people are thinking he's going to take more from Biden, and you think he's going to take enough from Trump and do the opposite, is what you're saying, from what I understand?
That's right. In fact, Bobby Kennedy's having real problems because he's got a lot of nepotism in his campaign, having his relatives handle his ballot access thing, and they're not doing a very good job. They've only got ballot access in 3 states. And so he's not going to be credible in terms of being able to take votes away from either side with, if you don't have California and Texas and New York in your pocket, and each of those require signatures of hundreds of thousands of signatures to get on the ballot, it's very difficult. So he's trying to, considering going in as a libertarian. And if he does it as a libertarian, he'll certainly take votes away from Trump, not Biden.
I didn't even realize that. I didn't even know he was considering that.
Yes, that's because the libertarians have already permanent ballot access in about, it's over half of the states in the nation, including Texas and California, which would be a big leg up for him. And so that's really going to play big. And of course, the libertarians are not homosexual controlled like they used to be. The Mises Institute of Real Libertarians has taken over in a sense, has great influence with the Libertarian Party, and they're dead set against letting Kennedy rent their party for ballot access purposes, because they know that Kennedy is a Democrat welfare state person. And so that's but that's going to be a major issue in the election. And I think the deep state wants Kennedy in there just so that they can help mask the fact that that Putin or that Trump will be denied the election, and they can make it plausible. That's what they're after.
The one of the top leading candidates right now in the Libertarian Party is Professor Michael Rechtenwald, and I don't know if you're familiar with him, have heard him, but he was a former was it the New York University, New York College? I forget which university he was at, where he was he was literally a Marxist. And during the 2020 events, he stopped being a Marxist. He has since renounced his Marxism, says he's a full-blown libertarian. He studies the Mises Institute and the works of Mises, Ludwig von Mises, and of course of the Austrian School of Economics and stuff, where he can, he says he has been converted. Are you familiar with the gentleman? Because I've had him on the show a couple of times.
Well, I'm not really that familiar, but I'm always skeptical of someone. Now, Whittaker Chambers was someone who really, truly did repent of his communist past. Whittaker Chambers was a kindly person who was drawn to communism out of sympathy for humanity and the poor, etc., but saw its evil side and repented fully and exposed other Marxists. And I haven't seen Rechtenwald do that because when you expose other Marxists in the university system, of which, communists and Marxists know who's there, and call a spade, then I'm pretty skeptical about the level of repentance. We have to be very, very careful. The Republican Party is just full of Democrats in Republican garb. Right. I mean, in the state of Utah, where I'm living now, you have John Curtis, who was a Democrat before, who turned Republican. You can't get elected if you're a Democrat in Utah. So he turned Republican and played certain things. But, his chief of staff was in a camera undercover and admitted that, John Curtis really believes in abortion, but he can't say so in Utah because he would be unelected. And so he's lying through his teeth, and he's running for Senate. And he's ahead, of course, because the mainstream liberal news in every conservative state is controlled by mainstream news. They're pushing him. They want another Mitt Romney in conservative garb. And he's all his advertising about, I'm a conservative value type of person. He's just lying through his teeth. But this is the problem in the Republican Party. And that's why the Constitution Party has asked me to run for president on their ticket. Because we eventually have to get away from relying on the Republican Party for our conservative values, because we get sabotaged all the time at the very top. And as Pastor Chuck Baldwin said recently, nothing ever changes with the Republicans, even when they own both levels of Congress and the presidency, because of the control of the deep state. And it's a long shot. It's going to take a while. What I will bring to the campaign probably will be my knowledge of conspiracy. I'm the only one who has the detailed information of why the so-called 2014 coup in Ukraine was not a Western coup, but was pulled by the communist president of Ukraine. I'm the only one who has been broadcasting for 20 years about the phony fall of the Soviet Union, and while they went underground rather than in order to get aid and trade in the West. And I'm the only one who understands the lies that Putin told Tucker Carlson, who was completely naive and completely accepting that he had. In fact, he even admitted in the interview to Tucker, he said, the Russian hierarchy initiated the fall of the Soviet. Now, that's the first time a Russian leader has ever admitted that. I've been saying it for 20 years. Because yeah,
go ahead.
And so what I'm saying, but he lied to Tucker and said, I did this because we wanted to have peace and cooperation with the West, and the West rejected us. And that just feeds the conservative furor that Russia's the good guy, that our globalists are the evil ones. And sure, the globalists are the evil ones. I've been the supreme anti-globalist ever since I started writing the World Affairs Brief in 1982. But still, there are three predator centers, and Russia and China are also predators. And then, Russia's Putin is not a Christian. He's not anti-woke. In fact, the Russian communists have been infiltrating Hollywood and all of the social aspects of the West for many decades, trying to increase wokeness and increase homosexuality and increase immorality. So while he may not want woke pro KG or pro gay and pro transgender stuff in Russia, because he doesn't want to weaken his own people for war making purposes, but he is trying to weaken the West. Now, a person who is truly Christian and anti-woke wouldn't be trying to weaken another country by inserting wokeness into their nation through infiltration.
Doesn't that kind of work against them because it's so obvious, especially with China through TikTok, the way that they're trying to expose children to different sexualities, trying to promote it, trying to make it look cool, make it look acceptable, and really completely confusing the kids because they're young. They're not, there's always questionable in their sexuality, especially at a certain age. And one of the things that I think happens is that, and this was true with China, is that one of the things that the Chinese Xi Jinping did was outlaw boy bands in China because he thought it made Chinese teenagers, especially the boys, too feminine. And so he outlawed that type of band in China, but yet they're kind of getting exposed to it because people, but just by nature, want to bring in that stuff into their country. And I think that happens as Russia as well, especially even more so with Russia because of the trade with Russia, because of people traveling back and forth, that they see a lot of this, and that the communists don't want this in their country because they know how detrimental it is to society to push homosexuality, to push deviant lifestyles. And yet it's kind of coming back on them because they're pushing it on America. You see what I'm happening? You see what I'm saying? It's like it's going to happen to them as well, even though they think they're working to destroy our culture, and they are. I just think it has a flashback on them.
There is a backlash happening because, the media around the world infiltrates every country, and, Russian people are not immune. But the difference is Russia doesn't tolerate its corporate leaders, which are mostly still controlled by the Communist Party, just as they are in China.
Right.
Won't let them go woke, won't let them promote this stuff as is happening in the United States. And these people that are promoting that in the United States are not deep state controlled per se, except for the fact that they, corporations pick mainstream people to be CEOs. And mainstream people are loath to receive criticism for being extreme. And so the media is what drives corporate America to basically say, and I think there's a fair amount of immorality among corporate heads as well. They're not really moral people. And so they're susceptible to the corruption and to going along with things that conscience would normally say, you shouldn't do that. You should defend, for core values and family values and things, but they're not family value people.
Right.
But there's a lot of going along to get along, and the threat of boycott from the media weighs very heavily on these people. That's why all your major corporations, and there are a few exceptions, but a very few, are going along with this woke agenda, having transgender bathroom access and all this folderol. And, look at the NCAA and all of these people going along with allowing transgender males to compete with women in sports. Unfortunately, the Women's Golf Association said, no, we're not going to let transgender men into the women's. That's the only major sports organization that I know that has said no to transgender males competing with girls in sports.
And, I was talking there's a gentleman here by the name of Kevin Starrett here in Oregon. He's with the Oregon Firearms Federation. He's very much like the gun owners of America. There are no compromise. It's unlike the NRA, who I believe has compromised away our Second Amendment rights in many ways and was corrupt in many different ways. And we're seeing that now play out. But he was here, and he had gone to a school board meeting, and I've been to some of these school board meetings where you're watching big grown men, big men standing there, and debating on whether it should be okay to allow men into the bathrooms with little girls. And they're actually debating it. And we're like, it's beyond debate now. You should be kicking some ass. Okay. Excuse my language, but this is no is the answer. And we're not debating it. But yet they're getting these grown men to debate whether men dressed as women should be allowed to go to the bathroom with their little girls. I never thought I would see this kind of nonsense.
Yeah, or in locker rooms, where they see other women in dress. And a lot of these people, I mean, it's like, Bruce Jenner, who claims now to be a girl, he still prefers sex with women. So what does that tell you? This guy is just a plain pervert.
Right.
I think we cannot underestimate the role that Satan has in people's lives. People tend to think that if I'm being influenced by Satan, I'm going to have some dark, brooding feeling coming over, but that isn't true at all. In our conscience, the way that it works, you have three voices that can interact with your conscience: your own thoughts, the Lord giving you promptings to do things that you're usually resistant to. That's why you're getting prompted. Warnings about things that you should feel nervous about. And then you have Satan, and he isn't out there saying, go kill somebody necessarily. But he first starts out giving you comforting signals. He always got to counter what the Lord wants you to get up on time, or to stop watching TV, or stop eating junk food. He said, oh, it's okay. You can get away. You can lose weight later, and you can do this and that. You see, the voice of Satan is just very slick and very comforting because he's appealing to your innate weaknesses. And so this is the battle that's going on in America, and we're losing the battle because people no longer understand the workings of conscience. We no longer teach it in our churches. In the 50s, you used to hear parents talk a lot about conscience to their kids, and you don't hear that anymore at all. And so we have lost morality, and we're losing our youth, mostly because of public school propaganda. And I can't believe conservatives are still trying to reform public schools through serving or trying to get on school boards. They ought to get the message. You can't reform the public schools because they are government schools. And education is one of my platforms running in the Constitution Party, is that all education ought to be competing, meaning nobody ought to be able to take anyone's tax money for their education. Education has values. Values should always be competing. And the only way to allow for that is you pay for your own education. You can have public schools, but they got to be user fee based, not tax based, so that they are competing on an equal basis with private and homeschooling, who don't have to pay twice: one for public school, which is destroying society, and two for their own private education. Now, I realize that's unpopular, even with conservatives who love to have other people pay for their lavish public schools that they send their kids to. But as a matter of fairness, we have to understand that. And as a compromise, I feel like if you can't get rid of tax funding of education, which is an impossibility in today's education is like motherhood and apple pie in politics. But at least we ought to give homeschooling parents and private school parents a total exemption from the property tax portion that goes to public schools, so they're not having to pay twice for education.
And that is something that, when we look at what is our goal, and people always say, oh, well, you got to get good candidates elected. And really, it's not just about getting good candidates elected. The goal is to change the policy, and to change the policy so that it does conform to constitutional government, limited government, and very little government involvement in our personal lives. And education, you can't get any more personal than that, especially if you are a Christian, especially if you are someone who believes in limited government or conservative. And one of the things that's going on here in Oregon is that there is a push. There's a couple initiatives out there. One would force the money for each student to follow the student and allow the student to choose between a charter school, a private school, or homeschooling instead of just the public school choice. And the other one gives the parent the ability to choose what public school they can go to. Right now, if you live in a school district, you have to go to that school's school district. And so the second one, like you said, I don't think it matters which public school you go to. They're all bad. So it doesn't matter. It's like deciding which concentration camp to go to. I mean, no matter which one you decide, you're going to a concentration camp. But The first initiative where they're talking about the money following the student, I think is a much better idea, and it is a compromise, but it would allow people to get out of the system that I think should be our number one issue. This should be our number one issue here, because we already have several generations who've gone to public school, even my generation going back to the 70s and the 80s, who were indoctrinated, not educated. And it's only getting worse and worse and worse. In Oregon, you don't even have to read, write, or do math and with any proficiency to get a graduate degree. And yet the parents aren't mad about this. They're not angry about it. I don't get it. So I think that should be our number one issue is educating the next generation. And the only way we're going to do it is through homeschooling or private schools where parents make sure the curriculum follows what the Constitution states, a limited government, and teaches, morality, teach an objective morality. And I think that we would be a better place if we took that as our number one point, education.
Well, the thing that entices so many conservative parents is all the extracurricular, expensive facilities that public schooling provides. The plays, the sports program, the choral, the orchestra, the other types of things that they don't have to pay for. They know this stuff is expensive, but they want all of us who homeschool and to help pay for them. So they're corrupted by a benefit. Now, the problem with using the compromise of divvying up the tax money is the tax money comes from everybody. And so case law has generally been hostile to using any tax money for any religious purpose. Now, that's why what I'm promoting is a tax exemption, then takes it out of it's not everybody's money. You're simply not paying for what you don't use. Now, they'll come back with the argument, but public education is a benefit for everybody. And I say that's no longer true.
That's BS, right?
Because you get infected with all of these social media things in school, and that's where all the bad problems evolve in children, even good children that go to public. They get enticed by bad social mores and things in public schooling, so it's no longer a net benefit. Even if it were, it's still improper because this is a benefit, and you shouldn't be taking involuntarily other people's property to give a benefit to anyone. And so we really need to push for tax exemption for homeschooling and private schoolers who don't use the public schools.
I like that much better. I completely agree with you. And my producer, he's the one who you guys, you go back and forth. He's no longer my producer because I got kicked off the radio. Unfortunately, they got his job. And but he gets so angry because he talks about how he's being forced to pay for the public schools, which literally he's creating the children who are going to be his demise because they're indoctrinating them into this sick ideology that they're promoting. And he's just so frustrated that, because he pays so much in property taxes, we all do, that he's having to pay for his own demise, that he's having to pay for this indoctrination, and there's no way of getting out of it. It's almost like a form of slavery, these property taxes that force you to pay for schools who not only are educating them children badly, but they're indoctrinating them into the extreme ideologies.
Even putting that aside, it's what they omit and what they don't teach that's also so dangerous. Now, for example, I believe, and I've written this in my Foundations of the Ideal State, that citizenship ought to be by qualification, not by birth. That means that you have to qualify for citizenship once you become an adult. Now, a child raising up in the family is under the umbrella of the parent citizen, but when they become 18, they must qualify. And that means you must take an exam where all the answers are open book, in the sense that you know it in advance. You got to learn it. I don't care if they teach it in public schools, but you got to know this stuff. What are the limitations of lawmaking power? Now, that's important. You see, that's what the Constitution is all about, is restricting majority rule so that they can't be two wolves voting on dinner with one sheep, that you can't take away people's rights just because it's majority rule. So
Right.
you would have to have a list of questions and answers, about what are the limits of government. And then you have to sign on the dotted line that you will not do anything to take away people's fundamental rights. So you can elect a communist, but under that system, they'd lose their citizenship when they try to put a bill into Congress that takes away money from people, that violates their property rights to fund benefits for other people, which would be illegal under a tight language constitution. Now, I realize, Rob, that we can't get there from here because we don't have the majority anymore. I'm from Oregon. I know even before I left, we had lost the majority. And so that's democratic tyranny, basically, where the majority continue to vote away your rights, etc. But I think that when this war comes, and because it will be preceded by an EMP strike that will take down the grid probably for at least a year, because we don't stockpile any of the long distance transformers. They're big as 2 semi-trucks. They're huge. They're all made in China. We're not going to be able to reconstitute the grid because we don't have those transformers stockpiled in the US, and China, who's going to go to war with us, won't be supplying any of those. And so I think that there are going to be a lot of conservatives that leave the big cities as there are no more jobs when there's chaos and starvation going on. And they'll go back to rural areas where I think we can establish new conservative majorities and hopefully reconstitute our liberty and pockets of liberty, at least, because even though this war is going to get us into a global militarized global government, that's the purpose of our government letting this war happen, and is that we lose our liberty as a nation, but still they've got to play lip service to democracy. And I think they'll have to at least recognize when there are conservative majorities that want to do their own thing and reestablish constitutional values. That's my only hope, really. I don't have any hope on saving the entire nation because we just don't have the majority anymore. We are, half of the people don't vote. They're usually not on our side. Of those, of the half that do vote, about a third are Democrats, about a third are independents, about a third are Republicans. And about 20% of the Republicans are really solid conservatives. So we got 20% of 50% is a pretty small minority. Now, you can sometimes win an election by outvoting if you had fair elections, because we can be more activist. But those days are over now that they control all the election computers that are all tied to the internet. They can manipulate the results. They can insert programs that keep the finished result, 2% or less over the top, and then erase the program afterwards so it's non-traceable. This is the kind of stuff we're dealing with. So people have to wake up and to realize that we've got to get our conservatives really tightened up together and understand the real threat of the deep state and what it's doing to us. And, the issues that we discuss, even in the Constitution Party, don't differ much from the issues on the platform of the Republican Party. The difference is the Republicans never implement their platform. It's there to keep conservatives. It's there to keep conservatives attached to the party, rather than to actually do it finally. And so that's our real problem politically in this nation.
That was one of the things I discovered with the senator who I had investigated and found all kinds of questionable things going on, is that you look at many of the bills that he's putting forward, great conservative bills, and he would in fact he would use them to go to the Cattlemen's Association, promise them something, and put a bill up for them. He would promise something to the Farm Bureau and put a bill up for him. He'd go to the fishermen and promise something to them and put a bill up. But if you looked at the success rate, 90% or more of his bills failed. So yeah, he delivered on the promise by putting a bill forward, but most of those bills failed. And the ones that passed were the ones that he compromised on, like the windmill bill. We were opposed to the windmills being installed off the coast of Oregon, and he was the chief sponsor for the bill that actually facilitated the call areas and the BOEM, Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, selling those leases. And so what you discover is that he's able to manipulate the system so it looks like he's a really good conservative because he's putting forth the conservative ideas, garnering the support of these special interest groups who are mostly conservative. But then in the end, he's not getting a conservative result that you would want because he's compromising with the Democrats. And I think that's what we see in Washington. And like you said, under McConnell and under Ryan, during those first 2 years of the president's term, if anyone had any doubt that the Republicans aren't working for conservatives or people who are constitutionalists, that should have proven it, because they could have fixed the border, they could have fixed the education system, they could have fixed the overbloated government bureaucracy that we're dealing with. But none of that was done. It was nothing but McConnell and the other gentleman, I forget his name now offhand, just completely stalling, is Paul Ryan, stalling all of anything good coming out of the legislature, which really has the purse strings to control or have authority over those bureaucracies and all those programs. And it's very sad, because I imagine if those bills, if they would have done something, especially with immigration, that President Biden couldn't undermine, we wouldn't be in that problem now. And so we kind of almost have to blame those 2 years when the conservatives, the Republicans, I should say, had the House, the Senate, and the chief administration, right?
Well, this is very, very true. And that's why now we have a flood coming across the border. And even as one reporter asked Biden when he was on the border, why don't you use your executive orders to simply shut this down and stop it? And he said, I don't have the power. What? You had the power to do away with remain in Mexico, and you could reinstall that here. You
Right.
said that we were going to build a couple of mile area of the wall just to placate conservatives, but you've never done that. The point is, this is a wide open avalanche, and it's never going to end. That's why this Alejandro Mayorkas sits there before the Congress. You notice how he always has his nose in the air. It's the most arrogant view I have ever seen of a federal official. Just try to get with me, and what you'll get in return is worse. And it's probably true. Biden would pick somebody even worse, but that's no reason he needs to be impeached. It won't ever happen. But the point is, I'm afraid we're at the point, Rob, and I'm going to say this very plainly. We're at the point they're going to steal this next election. Trump is not going to win. It's going to continue the wide open borders, millions per year. It's going to literally destroy this nation with crime and with welfare spending. All the blue states are already hemorrhaging money, trying to build apartments and everything for these illegals. And it's just never going to stop until we get to war. Because you see, when you have an immoral nation who wants abortion, and the majority want abortion because they're immoral and they want that safety valve, so they don't have to take the consequences of their having unprotected sex. But the point is, an immoral nation eventually gets the judgment of God, and we're going to have a World War III, and we are going to be attacked in this nation. Now, they're not going to attack cities per se. They're going to hit military targets only first and try to blackmail the West into submission, because the Russians and Chinese don't want to destroy the American economy, of which they depend on. They just want to control it. And so it's not that Putin is going to try to overturn the globalist deep state because he's going to give us our freedom. Russia and China want to control their own version of the New World Order, which would be even more tyrannical, with even more prisons. At least the U.S. globalists have to pretend to at least be civil, to pretend to not be as tyrannical as the communists and things. But this is not going to turn out to be pretty. You're never going to see digital central bank currency, because even the elite will need cash when the internet and the electricity goes down. Now you're going to see digital currency. In fact, we already have digital banking. Let's face it. I mean, they can cut you off, and they are cutting off people even as we speak from having access to the bank accounts. But I'll tell you, cryptocurrency is going to zero when there's no electricity and no internet. How do you collect on your crypto? You're not going to get anything. And so I've dedicated a good deal of my career to helping people prepare for this eventual war, how they've got to relocate for security, how they've got to make sure they have an underground basement level concealed safe room, Because when all hell breaks loose and when there's starvation and roaming mobs going through from house to house, stealing and worse, killing and raping and things, you've got to be able to get out of the way. It's good to have weapons, but you're not going to be able to kill all the hundreds of thousands of people. You need to be able to get out of the way and be in a safe place and a safe, chamber in which they can't break into or find.
So I'm on the coast of Oregon, and there's not a lot of basements here because the groundwater level is much higher than in a lot of places. Can you build a safe room, a good quality safe room in a place like Bandon, Oregon, or here on the coast? You've been on the coast over here. You've seen what it's like. Is that possible?
Well, it is possible. We've done one in Houston in the actual water table by having a complete membrane around the concrete, basement to go, but that's expensive. It's really much cheaper to relocate to the hill country. And there's all kinds of hills where you don't have that water table problem. Even in Florida, there's some high ground in Florida where people can build basements. But unfortunately, in those areas, you talk to we don't do basements. We don't do basements. And so at great expense, you have to get a commercial contractor who will do the concrete form work to do it, and it gets expensive. But that's why in strategic relocation, I talk to people about, look, if you're near a military base and you're downwind from it, don't build a bunker, move. It's much cheaper to move and relocate than to do the hardening to resist blast effects. So the shelters that I have designed in my career, I don't provide any blast protection, because if you're near enough within 10 miles of a military base to need blast protection, you need to move while times are still good, because the devastation and the people problem and surviving after a nuclear event, if you're 10 miles from a military target, is just not a place you want to live in. It's like Hiroshima. 50% of the people survived that, but they wish they were dead because they suffered from radiation sickness for so many years and eventually had to move anyway under less than ideal conditions.
One of the places I used to live we were just 20 minutes from Sandia Labs, which is in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And I think it's Kirkland Air Force Base where Sandia Labs is located. And, the things we used to see, the lasers coming out of there, the black helicopters, the strange flying machines that they had there, you'd get to see a lot of cool stuff. But from what I understood, it was like number 3 on the list of being hit by a nuclear weapon if we went to war with China or Russia. It was number 3 on the list. And yet literally most of New Mexico is a desert. But that's where they've got a lot of secret bases. Nevada's the same thing. And so, I've been talking with my wife about moving. And one of the things that we were going to get was the book you offer, Strategic Relocation, because we're not sure where to move. And here's the problem, is that we're so invested in Oregon. We have spent 25 years here, and we are, we have a business, we have rentals, we have family here. And I think that's the biggest problem, is trying to convince everyone it's time to leave before it's actually past time to leave. And that's the problem I'm having with convincing my wife and my family that we need to get going. And it's hard to be able to reinvest in somewhere else. So how do you make that move? You know what I mean? How do you convince people? How do you find a place where you can live and provide for yourself? It just blows my mind, because it's very overwhelming.
Well, I didn't leave Oregon till I was 46 and had 6 children, and I had investments in land and property and a business and all of those types of things. And, it can't be liquidated all at once, but if you really rely on the Lord and listen to inspiration, the answers will come. You'll be able to remember, it's never going to be easier than right now. 10 years from now, it's going to be impossible because we'll be in war. 2 years from now, the inflation might even be worse, and the economy might even be worse. So what I'm just saying is that you can dilly and dally because it's inconvenient, but I'll tell you, trying to walk out of Oregon to a safe place in a Mad Max scenario is something you don't want to deal with. And
Right.
that's why I encourage people to subscribe to my World Affairs Brief. It comes out every Friday because I do give a realistic viewpoint of what's happening in the world. I'm not optimistic about what's going to happen, and we have a prep tip. Even my son writes a prep tip at the bottom of each brief on how to do preparedness. But it's important to get the information, the credible information, to your wife and family and things, so that they can understand that this is only going to get worse and less capable of moving if you don't do it now. I think that time is, I don't think there's going to be a savior. I don't think the economy is going to rebound. In fact, it's a balloon economy. We could have a collapse at any time that the Fed decides to pull the plug. And then it's almost impossible to sell out your property and to move. So I can't emphasize enough that we're headed for a very, very dark period, the worst period in history. And we need to start to prepare now. We need to relocate if necessary. And even if you can't relocate to one of the safer states in the union, at least you can get to safer areas, get to high ground so that you can do a safe room in a basement area. And now, fortunately, on the west coast of Oregon, there aren't any nuclear targets to the east of you. Occasionally, you might get wind down from Seattle.
Right.
So, a safe room really needs to have at least a 12-inch concrete ceiling on it so that you do have radiation protection and fire protection if the house burns down around you. But you can still make it in Oregon. It's not going to be ideal. You're going to have gun control someday, just like California, et cetera. That doesn't mean they'll find your guns if you have them concealed properly, et cetera. But if you ever have to use them, then you're going to lose them. So
right.
It's not going to be nice. And even the conservative states like Idaho and Utah are being focused on by the deep state to corrupt them by inserting these phony Republicans and Democrats and unfortunately we have an uneducated Republican voter that just rubber stamps anybody who has the Republican title on them. And so we get rhino Republicans in the governorship every single time. And it's very sad. But it's not hopeless. We do need to realize that the Lord will preserve a remnant when this war comes down. We just have to be prepared to survive the war and to get to rural areas where we can reestablish constitutional republics.
The book that I have on the screen, Strategic Relocation, that's the 4th edition. Is that the newest one, or is there a newer one out? Because I saw a couple of copies of them, and I didn't know if this was the latest edition.
This is the latest edition. And, the issue, and this was updated about COVID, so it does have all the dangers of the COVID problem and the restrictions that came about that. It has all the updated gun, even though the gun laws keep changing, even more states now have constitutional carry than I covered in 2020 when this was updated. But that's why I cover in the World Affairs Brief all the rapid changes in the world. It's hard to keep a print book in change, in current, because of all of the fast changing happenings that are going on in the world. So I think getting Strategic Relocation and subscribing to the World Affairs Brief is your best option for knowing when this war is going to happen and how to prepare.
And a couple of other books that you have written: The Secure Home, Architectural Design, Construction, and Remodeling of Self-Sufficient Residences and High Security Retreats. This was the 3rd edition. And then the other one that you wrote, The High Security Shelter. All of them are easily found. I found them on eBay. I found them on Amazon. I found them at thriftstore.com. And they're still in print. And so obviously there are people out there who definitely need that. But I agree with you. Your World Affairs Brief is probably the best place to keep current, because like you said, a book that's been printed isn't going to change and evolve with the evolving situation.
And it's happening fast. And I might say that rather than put money to Amazon, even though it's got to be on Amazon because that's where people go, I prefer people go to joelskousen.com where I sell all my books. That's the preferred way to, I think, help out with and support my work.
And just in case anyone who's watching wants to know, that's worldaffairsbrief.com, worldaffairsbrief.com, where you can pick this up, and you can go to Joel Skousen. joelskousen.com is what it was?
That's right. That's right.
That's great. Joel, I hope you success on your constitutional endeavors as far as running for president. I think that, like you said, you're going to have a much different viewpoint than what President Trump is. President Trump he's about a lot of drama, and the substance there is lacking compared to what you're talking about, the things that are really going on that are behind the scenes. I don't think we're seeing it. I don't think he realizes it as much as he thinks he realizes. There's a deep state out there. And, even if we're lucky and Trump does win, I hope he would start listening to people like you. Do you think there's a chance that can happen?
There's no chance that could happen. He's surrounded by mainstream people. They would be afraid to death to have an expert in conspiracy on his team, lest the media pick that up, and they would crucify Trump over it. And he would be embarrassed enough not to defend me, but to say, okay, well, I'll find somebody else because he has got that problem. Now, I'm not going to win this election, but I can tell you, we can send a stronger message to the deep state because Trump isn't going to win in Oregon anyway. So don't throw your vote away to Trump. If you vote for Joel Skousen, the Constitution Party in Oregon, you're going to send a more fearful message to the deep state that America is waking up than if you fall for the illusion that Trump is going to save us.
And I thank you very much for running. Before you get out of here, is there anything you'd like to tell the listeners?
I have written a special piece on both my websites, worldaffairsbrief.com and joelskousen.com, called The Still Small Voice of Conscience. To me, regardless of what brand of Christianity, or even if you're Muslim, everybody has a conscience. And if you learn how to listen to the signals and recognize the countering signals of Satan to the promptings of the Lord, your life will change, and you'll get warnings that no one else will get. And we're going to need those warnings someday if we're going to survive what's coming.
Do you believe that?
The Still Small Voice of Conscience at worldaffairsbrief.com or joelskousen.com.
Do you believe that a person who is an atheist, that they still have a conscience, that they are still able to hear that conscience? Maybe they're ignorant to religion. Maybe for one purpose or another, they are atheists, and maybe they're not rabid atheists. Maybe they're conservatives. Maybe they're libertarians. Maybe they're constitutionalists, but they still hear and say the same things that you're saying, but they're non-believers. Do they have a conscience as well?
They do. Everybody's got a conscience, because that's how the Lord's going to judge us in the last day. You're not going to be able to say, well, I didn't learn that in Sunday school. I didn't go to church. I say, yeah, but you had a conscience, and I warned you about that. I gave you nervous feelings about that. I prompted you to do this. We're going to have a million testaments against us or for us, depending on how we listen to that voice of conscience. Now, I will say this: when you're a dedicated atheist and you resist the promptings of conscience, which affirm God's existence, whether it's in the majesty of life around us and things, your conscience does get damaged. When you tell the Lord to get lost constantly, you get penalized. Not so much that you still can't be judged, but you don't get the same amount of signals as a person that really listens to those conscience. And I tell people the problem, 90% of the warnings and promptings of conscience are about your temporal affairs, not about spiritual affairs. It's about weight control. It's about eating junk food and not doing it. It's about not wasting time watching too much television. It's about reading the right things. You see, I use that every week in my World Affairs Brief. You get all this flood of information that comes past my desk every day, and I get nervous feelings about things that aren't quite right, because I've got a very sensitive conscience after working with it over the years. And so I may not know what's wrong about what I'm reading, but I get a nervous feeling that tells me this isn't right. And so now I got to do the homework and find out what is right. And then you get a calm feeling when you come across truth that really settles well within your soul. And that's how you get answers. It's not open revelation. It's not dictation. The Lord makes us do the homework so that we grow, but he's there to give us warning signals. So Satan gets a counter order. Oh, it's okay. You can do that. You can get away with that. And when you learn to distinguish and become good at listening to conscience, everything in life goes better. And you're going to need that kind of expertise in listening to conscience and developing the self-control, by the way, to do it. Because you see, conscience is very easy to tell to get lost. It's just a verbal, it's just an idea in your mind. But that's why self-control in the temporal affairs is so important, to telling the Lord that I can do this. I will use the self-control to abide by what I know is right. And that's how we merit the blessings of the Lord. So that would be my message to your listeners, is get in touch with your soul and with conscience and start to develop the self-control in the temporal affairs, which will prove to the Lord that you're worthy of higher things in the spiritual affairs.
Thank you for that. That was a very informative statement. And, there are people out there who, I was raised steeped in religion myself. And there are a lot of people out there who were religious who, well, they just weren't good people. And
Right.
yet they hid behind the word of God. They hid behind the Bible. But yet they were doing things that were wrong. They were having affairs. They used drugs. They used alcohol. They were overweight, slothly type people. And yet they used the Bible as a way to bash against other people. And I thought some of the people they're bashing against are really better than the pious person I don't know if that's the proper term, but you know what I mean? You understand what I'm saying, right?
Yeah, precisely, because this is a problem in Christianity. And I say this as a Christian, because many sects believe that in the once born again experience, you're covered. No matter what you do, the grace of God takes it all away and covers for your sins. And that's not true. I believe in a daily walk with Christ, that you have to be listening to conscience. You can't say, yes, because I committed at one time, and then the next day when I got a prompting, I told the Lord to get lost, that you can go up to him and say, I'm saved. He said, wait a minute. Before you think you're saved, you've got to respond to why you told me to get lost 150,000 times. So you see, we have to walk the walk as well as live and commit to it spiritually. And that's why conscience is so important, because that's where we're being tested every day. You may think you're born again, but the test. Now, I'm not a believer in mechanical works, meaning you pay so many alms, or you pay your tithing, or you do so much service that you're guaranteed salvation. No, we don't believe in a gospel of works. But I do believe in spiritual works, meaning when you're prompted by the Lord to do something, you better do it, or you're accountable for it. And remember, the atonement of Jesus Christ only covers for sins that are repented of, not for sloven rebellion, not for saying no to the Lord, not saying get lost, I don't want to hear that. It isn't covered by the atonement. You got to repent for those things. And we can do it, but I'll tell you, we need to really up our game. And that's why we have this hypocrisy in Christianity of people violating the laws of God and the promptings as well, because they think I'm saved because I've been saved once and I'm always saved. And that's just not going to cut it with the Lord. Now, I will tell you this as a final word. I have several good friends who are libertarians who aren't members of any religion. And they may be a little bit ambivalent about God, etc., and that's still something, but they listen to conscience assiduously. They never cheat anyone. They always help when they see a need. They keep their weight under control. They exercise. They discipline their kids. They homeschool their kids. So you see, that's what really pleases the Lord, is when you're actually doing what he prompts you to do, not just following the mechanism. The commandments are fine, but they only get you in the ballpark where you're supposed to be able to be sensitive enough to the Spirit to listen to the promptings of God. That's where the real test is taking place. So that's my message. May we all be better at listening to the still small voice that comes to each of us personally and is personalized to our own needs. And I think we will survive what's coming, and we will be prepared because we'll follow the promptings and get prepared.
That's some beautiful stuff there, Joel. I hope people take that to heart. I really think that was some really good stuff there, and I appreciate you coming on the show. Hopefully, we'll get you back on again, right?
Well, be happy to, Rob.
You got it. Well, you take good care, sir, and I'll be sure to promote your World Affairs Brief, and try to promote those books for you, because I think they're of great value. So thank you for everything you do.
My pleasure, Rob. Bye now.
All right. Bye-bye. All right. And that was some incredibly good stuff. That was a very wise man who, if you just knew the life of Joel Skousen and the way he lived, he survived a plane wreck, which he shouldn't even have survived. He walked away from it, I believe. And he tells that story one time on the radio when I had him, when we were interviewing him on the radio show. And it was just an incredible story about how he crashed his plane. And the plane, if you saw the pictures, was like completely destroyed. And yet he was able to walk away and or suffer almost no injury. It was an incredible thing. Maybe next time I have him on the show, I'll have him tell that story again, because I think it's a good story. And I think he has great value in the things he's talking about. I think that there are, like he said, there are people out there who are good and bad, whether they're religious or non-religious. I think there are people who just completely misconstrue what's going on in geopolitics, international politics, between the difference between the globalists, the communists, and how we're going down this road. And it's going to be a bumpy ride, and hopefully, I really don't know what's at the end of it. I don't have those answers. I'm just trying to present to you some of the questions, and because we're looking for those answers, and just having the questions is the first part of it. Someone asks, and that's what I often tell people. I don't have all the answers. Hell, I don't have all the questions, but I think if we got more of those questions and we ask them and listen to knowledgeable people like Joel Skousen explain those things to us, especially because he is such a wise man, I think that we better ourselves for those things. And, before I get out of here, I do want to give props to 3H Tree Service. They're one of my sponsors. 541-294-1800. I highly recommend that you give them a call if you've got trees that you need removed off your property. 3H Tree Service at 541-294-1800. Go check out their videos on 3H Tree Service on Facebook. Yes, they've got a Facebook page by the same name, 3H Tree Service, and you'll see some of the things that they're able to do. So they're very skilled people. They'll remove those problem trees with surgical precision, as I like to say. And go see Tim over at Tom and Gigs if you have some car problems. You got some car problems, you need a new muffler, you need a new tonneau cover, you need an RC car, a remote control car. He's got a lot of those cool cars over there. You got to check out his latest stock. I mean, he's got a whole bunch of new RC cars in. He got them in over Christmas, and he's still got quite a few left over there. You need to go check them out. They're great presents for any young person who wants to learn how to learn not mechanics, so to say, because they're not really cars, but they teach you how small little machines like that work. They teach you about the designs of the cars, and they have all kinds of different parts. If you go to Tom and Gigs, they've got several walls where there's just nothing but a whole bunch of parts on the wall for these little bitty cars. And so if you've got an RC car and you need a part, Tom and Gigs is the place to go. I highly recommend them. And of course, if you are looking for a place that sponsors or promotes and defends your Second Amendment rights, Oregon Firearms Federation, the only no compromise gun organization in Oregon, like I said, they're not like the NRA, who has, in many ways, have sold us out. They're a no compromise group. If you're looking for someone to contribute to, or to follow, to go get their news alerts, Kevin Starrett puts out all kinds of news alerts all the time. Oregon Firearms Federation, go to OregonFirearms.org, and they can get you set up with knowing your rights and what's the latest cases that are going on. I also want to promote a couple of clubs. These gun clubs that I'm promoting, they're not my sponsors, but I want to promote them because I think that if you just listen to Joel Skousen for the last hour or so, you've got to realize there is a coming conflict that's going to happen, and it's probably going to get violent. It's going to be militaristic, and you've got to become more of a someone who's a marksman, someone who can actually hit a target. And they've got a 5-stand trap out there if you like going trap shooting, which, once again, you talk about honing your skills. One of the skills that you're going to have if we do go into a war is being able to hunt, and hunting small game is very important. Well, this 5-stand trap at the Bandon Gun Club, if you see their picture here, they would be able to provide you with the ability to hone those skills for going hunting and stuff. And you can find out where they are. They're here in Bandon, bandongunclub.org. Once again, that's bandongunclub.org. And of course, the Tioga Sports Park Association at the Tioga Sports Park. And that's happening on the weekends. I believe they're open on the weekends. And unlike the Bandon Gun Club, the Tioga Sports Park has a rifle range. It's 150 yards, and you can go out there and shoot the rifles that you want and shoot at targets and teach your kids how to shoot. Like I said, it's probably good to learn how to use a gun, how to use a handgun, how to use a shotgun, and how to use a rifle. So that's why I'm promoting both of these shooting facilities. Maybe I'll contact the one in Myrtle Point, because I heard Myrtle Point has a really fine gun club out there, and I don't think they have a rifle range in Myrtle Point, but they do have, I believe, shotgun and a handgun facility that you can use. Maybe I'll find out, call them and see if it's okay if I promote them on the show, because like I said, there's a coming conflict, folks. I think you can feel it. I know I can. Joel Skousen just talked about it. Next couple of weeks, I'm trying to get Trevor Loudon on here. I just talked to him on the phone a couple of days ago, and he said he would love to come on the show and talk about what's happening. And I think you'll just find this stuff interesting because, we got to be prepared, and you got to know who the players are. And if you're not sure, I recommend you watch my show. Go watch some of my past shows, because I've had some really great guests on lately. So I really hope you enjoyed this one. And so until next time, folks, carry on, Coos County. Carry on.